Hello, and thanks for tuning in to episode 5 of Rules Bites here on Myth Brigade. My name is Jason, and I'll be your host. This season, we've been taking a look at Warhammer Fantasy Role-Play 4th edition from Cubicle 7. We're going to continue that series today by taking a look at the system for corruption. The good denizens of the old world are constantly under attack from ruinous powers that seek to darken and pervert pretty much all that is. Some of these influences are subtle, some of them not so much. Corruption points are 4th edition's way of measuring a character's gradual loss of grip on his or her soul. The more corruption you accrue, the deeper into the sway of chaos you fall. Along with concepts like psychology, corruption adds a different level of texture that you can use to challenge your players, aside from just traditional sword and shield encounters. So put on your warp retardant jackets and let's dive in. There are essentially two ways that your character can gain corruption in 4th edition, and those are through dark deals and by being subjected to something called corrupting influences. Dark deals represent situations when your character has tried all else and turns to the ruinous powers of chaos for a desperate last attempt at success. Here, you take on a single corruption point in exchange for re-rolling a test. This can be done after spending fortune on the test, or even if the character has no fortune left at all. There's an optional rule called Encroaching Darkness on page 182 of the core rules that takes it a step further and allows the GM to indicate the intrusion of chaos into the situation at hand. So textural things like distant laughter or sudden panic in the surrounding wildlife or other effects appropriate to the environment. Some other examples might be the spoiling of foods like fresh meat and milk or stillborn livestock, something to make it clear that chaos is present. The point here for the GM is subtlety. If you go overboard, it could derail the adventure. I like to set the severity of these effects based on how pivotal the act being influenced is. So the more critical the moment, the more serious the manifestation of chaos. Next up, corrupting influences. Corrupting influences are places, people, objects, or even situations that are rife with the influence of the dark gods. Avoiding the effects of a corrupting influence requires a challenging endurance or cool test as determined by the GM. Success of a high enough level ignores the effects. Failure results in the character gaining a level of corruption appropriate for the type of exposure. There are 3 severity levels to corrupting influences. A minor exposure is classified as fairly insignificant, but still an erosion of the soul's strength. This kind of exposure results in the character taking a single corruption point and likely having a bit of a terrible memory that might haunt them when they're trying to sleep. Any level of success on the resistance test negates all effects of this type of exposure. Moderate exposure is a little more severe and takes a bit more to resist. Failed resistance tests yield 2 full corruption points. This can be reduced to 1 with a success level of 0 to 1 and is only fully negated with a success level of 2 or more. So even the hardiest of souls may have a hard time shaking off these experiences. The third and final severity is, of course, the major exposure, which are pretty serious and can quickly consume a character's soul. For each failed test to resist a major exposure, the character gains 3 corruption points. This can be reduced to 2 with a success level of 0 to 1 and down to 1 with a success level of 2 or 3. Only a success level of 4 or above will actually avoid all corruption impact. So it's kind of a pretty big deal. Note that being around more severe types of corruption may call for repeated resistance tests. So if you find yourself near a greater demon or something like that, just get the f*** out. Things start to get really interesting when a character gains more corruption points than his or her willpower and toughness bonuses combined. When this condition is met, the character must make a challenging endurance test. Success means that the character has resisted corruption for the moment, but another test must be made anytime further corruption points are earned. Failure means that the character's body or mind is about to be forever mutated by corruption. When this happens, the character's corruption total is actually reduced by a number equal to his or her willpower bonus. But the player has to then roll against a table on page 183 to determine if the mutation is physical or mental. A roll is then made on the appropriate mutation table to find out just how messed up the character's about to get. Maybe they grow a tentacle, or their face is upside down, or they start to hear voices, or they're hearing voices while having a tentacle growing out of their head. Chronic diarrhea. Who knows? It can get pretty bad. Physical corruptions actually change the character's body in some way. Some effects are subtle, and some are pretty horrific. All effects offer quite a unique opportunity for roleplay, and some carry penalties and even bonuses to the game mechanic. Watch out for rolls of 96 or above on the physical mutations table, as these give the GM and his or her sixth sense of humor the ability to pick which effect your character will endure. And GMs, this is a great place to apply a little bit of your own imagination and flair to extend the results table. Maybe you'd like to afflict a character with a forked tongue or a second set of eyes glaring from the back of their head. Use your imagination, get gross, have fun, but stay balanced on the actual mechanical effects of the outcome. Next up are mental corruptions. Mental corruptions are essentially mental illnesses that plague your character as a result of his or her exposure to chaos. All results carry a material game effect as well as some key role-playing opportunities. Now, GMs take note, when you're describing situations from the point of view of afflicted characters, you should consider any mental illnesses that they may have. For example, how might a character with worried jitters perceive a crowded tavern as opposed to someone not so afflicted? Encourage your players to keep the roleplay aspect of their corruption in mind as well, because it's really about a lot more than numbers. It's your soul we're talking about here. Metagamer warning. A character's flirt with darkness is kind of a private affair and shouldn't be readily apparent to the other characters right at first. Unless the effect is a significant mutation, the other character should find out about the situation over time. Gradual changes in behavior or slight physical changes. Perhaps the character is taken suddenly to wearing cloaks, to hide that horn protruding from his or her skull. Using the slow manifestation option on page 185 affords a nice way to let the player roleplay the struggle of certain corruptions and to make the reveal to the party feel more organic. I did that on purpose. Maybe that tentacle sprouts first as an ugly wart-like protrusion. What does the character do to try to hide it? What would happen if he attempted to burn it or cut it off? Does it squeal and shrivel only to grow back slightly larger the next day? Maybe the crawling skin result starts with the character believing themselves to be crawling with bugs. The effect subsides only to come back later and at a very inopportune moment. The options here are really limitless, and the GM and player should collaborate to play it out to its fullest. At this point, you should be wondering, how does one remove corruption? There are three ways, and none of them are easy. The first, which we've covered in some detail, is through mutation. I like to think of this as almost like a volcanic eruption, where a built-up amount of corruption just overflows. The pressure is relieved, but the landscape is forever changed. An eye for an eye, a few corruption points for a tentacle. The second option for removing corruption is through something called dark whispers. Here, the GM offers the player a secret deal. Remove n number of corruption points in exchange for committing an action that would please the Ruinous Powers. Perhaps the character allows an important enemy to escape, or drops the party's remaining foodstuffs down a deep, dark well. Maybe the character shoots a companion in the back accidentally, just as they're about to score a killing blow. There are a lot of options here, and the right dark whisper at the right moment can really spice things up, so I would encourage both player and GM to explore this a little. That said, the GM should be very careful to match the corruption removed with the cost of the required action. If I'm the player with the arrow sticking out of my back, you've got some explaining to do. Dark whispers should always be presented via note or private chat if a virtual table is used, just to make sure that secrecy is maintained and that your meta players at the table don't have their spidey senses going off. The final means of corruption removal is through something called absolution. Here, the character has a hand in some epic deed to thwart the will of chaos in the old world. The rules are fairly loose, but some examples might be the banishment of some major demonic force or the slaughter of an entire cult and its high priest. Whatever it is, it has to be really epic and very difficult to achieve. GMs should definitely think about absolution when designing a campaign. As slippery a slope as corruption can be, it is definitely helpful to have some points throughout the campaign where absolution is possible. The last note here is that the corrupting powers of chaos are very well known throughout the old world, and its dangers are preached far and wide. Players should be well warned of the lasting impacts of corruption and at least given a slight chance to avoid it. Players, when the table rolls begin, you'd be well advised to remember the mutation thwarting effects of resilience points. Alright, I think that's it. You now know everything you need to know about the corrupting power of chaos and how to avoid hearing voices or growing an antler out of your butt. Help us continue our struggle against chaos and the YouTube algorithm by clicking the thumbs up below and giving us some feedback in the comments section. What game should we tackle next? What are we getting right? Where could we improve? Your feedback is incredibly important to helping us plan for the channel. Also, subscribe and tap the bell to stay up to date with future live campaign sessions, more rules bites, product reviews, and all things RPG. And until next time, we will be right here making dark deals with ruinous powers to help us get the next episode out on time.